Wow, here we are again. This is Brother Peter with tidbits from the Word. When you do as much study as I do, you find out many things about the Bible that would be to the average person baffling to the mind and the heart. We find that in the Psalms that they were written by a human being. Many of them were written by a guy by the name of David. And David was, the Bible said, a man after God's own heart. Yet we find David in many troubles. What the deal is if you stick your hand in hot water, it will get burnt. And David many times would reach over there and stick his hand in the hot water, and he got burnt over it. Now, he was a human being, just exactly like you and I, and here he is writing many pages of our Bible are about this King David. He started out as a shepherd boy. He started out very close to God. And he put all of his trust in the Lord. When the Lord sent a bear out, he gave him strength enough to tear his jaw off. When the Lord sent a lion out, he gave David enough strength to tackle that lion and do the lion. And he played his heart day and night out there on the field. And as he watched over his flock at night and took care of them, God was with him and God watched over him. And he was one of God's champions when he was a very young man. And God saw fit to take this young man and bring him up through a very difficult life and bring him into a place where he could use him in a great way as the king. And before he became the king, he had the devil 100% against him. 100%. The devil did not let up with David. It stayed on him day and night. Now, David had a battle, just as you and I have a battle. David had a battle physically, and his physical battle sometimes won over his spiritual battle. We must be careful what we do with these eyes. Do you know, perhaps, and this is not a very good saying in a sense of a word, but we need to be blinded to the world. We need to be blinded to the world. I would almost think there is a possibility that a blind man would have more ability in serving God than a man that sees with his natural eye. Why do you say that, Brother Peter? Because the natural eye is drawn to the things sometimes that are absolutely 100% opposed to God. They're the opposite of what God is and who God is. This world today has put forth before mankind many things that will steal a man's mind first, and then his heart. Once his mind begins to wander, then his heart follows, and all of a sudden you find out, here's a man that was God's man, is God's man, and his heart is over in left field, because his eyes are over in left field. We must stay close to God, each one of us individually in our own way. And that really is a 100% fact. We must stay close to God. Now we're going to read Psalm 13 today. And as we read it, it is a psalm that David wrote. And it is a prayer of distress. And this is his fifth prayer in the Psalms of distress. And we're only in Psalm 13. What was the problem? The problem's eyes, David's eyes, carried him away into a place that he shouldn't have been in. Now, this is not just the 13th Psalm. This Psalm perhaps was written all the way over in the place of the 100 and something Psalm. And this is where it took place in the Bible as Psalm 13. And so the order of it might be further down the road than we can really see. How long will you forget me, O Lord? Question. And then he says, forever? Question. How long will you hide your against me? How long will you hide your face from me? David had got into a place where he could not see the face of God. You know, the only thing that keeps us from seeing the face of God would be a sin. A sin can be so real that it will hide your face. It doesn't have to be a massive sin. This is a fairly small bottle right here. It can hide my face. Right here, it can hide my face. Get it up close, and it'll hide my face 100%. This very small bottle. A very small sin can hide your face from God, because God cannot look on sin. So if you have unconfessed sin in your life, God cannot look on that. You can be God's man and feel like you're totally separated from God by sin in your life. You must keep your life clean. Nobody can do it for you. You have to do it yourself. So, some think, and who are the some? The some are many Bible scholars today. If you are researching Bible, which I do on a continual basis, I have 40 books around me right here, right now, that I'm continually searching out these sections of Bible, like this Psalm 13. And many commentaries are adding and putting things in here. This commentary I'm looking at right here was put in here by Brother Jimmy Swaggart. Now, Brother Jimmy has a sixth sense when it comes to the Psalms. He is a very good psalmist breakdown person. I know that he had a group of people with him, helping him in these Psalms, as well as God ordaining his breakdown of the Psalms. And I have J. Vernon McGee's breakdown of this Psalm. I last night was through the night studying Brother Dake, J. Phineas Dake, in his Bible on a breakdown of the Psalms. I have many expositors who have expositored these Psalms, who have much more education, much more resources, and much more a factual group of people around them that help them do some things, what's called breaking down, going in between the words and in these Psalms, and seeing what God was doing with David during this period of time. You say, would God allow a man to get in such great trouble that he gets forlorn and he gets just beat down, yet he puts his whole trust still in God? Yes, he would. And this was David. What brought the troubles on David? Permissive sin. Permissive sin. If you permit and allow sin in your life, that sin will separate you for periods of time from the fellowship of God like you need it. Now, I was awakened this morning around 3 o'clock by the Lord Jesus Christ, the one that saved me at 3 o'clock in the morning, November 5th, 1972. Told me to get up and go to work and get out and do some studying. And I've been studying. It is now 10 minutes after 4, And I have been ardently trying to put down what am I going to say this morning in this psalm. And I have been through it and been through it. Some think this psalm was written by David during the time of Saul. Now, when you say some think, that means you've had to do some research to see what other people think has happened here as they were looking at David. And the time during that Saul was after David, and Saul was out to kill David, even though Saul was David's best friend. And they had become parted, and the devil was working on Saul to try to kill God's anointed. David was God's anointed. He had been God's anointed from his birth. And he was set up by God to be in the place he was in, the position he was in. Even though David's crying for help. And as he's crying for help, the far greater picture here in this psalm is that the coming suffering of Israel during the times of trouble. Now, we can get far-fetched in the Bible, and what seems far-fetched, by saying, how can you relate this Psalm of David over here to what is going to happen to Israel in the great awakening that there will be at the end time, and Israel will be reworking and reunited with God, and Israel will be brought forth again for a 1,000-year period. There will be a great time on this earth of Israel being restored. And you say, well, how can you see that over here in this time of trouble, and the reign of the Messiah will come? In Jeremiah chapter 30, we will see in Jeremiah chapter 30 over here, and verse 7. Let's take a look at it right quick. And chapter 30 in verse 7, and see what it says right here. Okay, here we go. Also, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. All of the Psalms link together and give us a picture of David's time right then, but David's time right then was an overlay of something that was going to happen in the future. And it's going to happen in the day of Jacob's trouble. That's the day when the Lord comes and sets up the kingdom of the 1,000 years. And by the way, David is going to reign during that 1,000 years. And we can find that in the Psalms. You say, Brother Peter, how do you come to that conclusion? It isn't how I come to that conclusion. It's how many men who are much more astute than me have come to that absolute conclusion that these Psalms are an overlay or an underlay of what is going to be in the future. And that's what it's going to be. Now, verse 2, how long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Now, David had got himself into a place to where he could only see in himself. And he could see, when we look in ourself, we find nothing but trouble. Self is nothing but trouble. God has to be between me, myself, and I. I has to stay out of the way, and me has to fight the battle, and myself has to say, look, self, depend completely on God and not on yourself. Because if you do, you're going to get me, myself, and I, all three of us are going to be in trouble. And when we get in trouble, if we don't call on the Lord, which is what David is doing here, he's calling on the Lord out of some misery that he made for himself. But all of his life is a picture of the beginning of the Messiah coming, the trouble of the Messiah as he went to the cross and whatever, and then as the end time comes up, David's writing a underlay, if you please. You can take David's life, lay it over what's going to happen in the future, and we can see it come true. And this earth, the Bible said, this earth, this world is a few days and full of trouble. But why? Because we have a troublemaker. The troublemaker is Satan. He came in the Garden of Eden and started trouble with Adam and Eve. And they were covered by the glory of God. And what happened to them? When they sinned, they fell from that sin and they had to be covered with something human. God had to kill 2 lambs and make 2 skins to put over these folks so that it would fit on them, so they could cover their nakedness, which was a thing that was revealed by the devil. Not as God had desired it to be done, but as the devil did it. Once again, we see this pertains to David during a time in Israel of great tribulation for David and great tribulation for Israel too during that period of time. And because of Saul himself being the king out there fooling around, chasing for 2-3 years, chasing David down, trying to kill him, being a poor example of what God would have him be. When you get away from God and you get to where God is not the one controlling you on a daily or hourly, minute by minute basis, you're in trouble. Saul was in trouble and David was in trouble. What brought them on? Both things were caused by a sin that caused separation of them. Consider here me, O Lord, my God. Listen, my eyes, O Lord, my God, lighten my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. What he's saying here is God, what my eyes see, it sure does look terrible. So I need you to come and lighten my eyes. I need you to take me out of this misery that I have made for myself. David's prayer here is, again, looking at Israel and seeing that the day of the Antichrist is coming in the future. And I'm not a revelationist in a sense of the word, but I see everything in the Old Testament as a revelation of what's going to come about back in the New Testament. You know that old saying is what goes around comes around? That's absolutely the truth. This earth is a merry-go-round. It goes around. By the way, this earth spins on its axis. It comes around every 24 hours. The sun comes up. Every 12 hours, the sun comes up and goes down. Comes up and goes down. Comes up and goes down. It's a continual revolution. And if you look at things the way they were, every single thing comes around that went around. It went around in this person, that person, and this person, and that person. And it's like a man headed for the electric chair. He does little petty crimes, and then he does bigger crimes, and bigger crimes, and bigger crimes, and he heads for the electric chair. And we can see, as we dig up the past record of those that went to the electric chair, all were in the same thing. They went around and came around and ended up in the electric chair. Well, if you get separated from God, you end up in trouble. But you know that the guy that ended up in the electric chair, when the first electric chair was made, people are still coming around the exact same way that guy did. And they're going to the electric chair the exact same way that guy did. And so we see a picture from the beginning of the electric chair to even now. Well, the Bible is written somewhat in that same manner. What you saw in the Old Testament, you see coming back around. The world's not getting better. The world is getting worse. It is headed for the great day, Jacob's trouble. Consider and hear me, O Lord, my God. Listen to my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. What David's saying here His eyes are open, but he's seeing evil. He saw evil before when he got in trouble with God, and he's seeing evil again. Every time we get in trouble with God, we see evil. Now, sometimes God allows that to come in our life so that we can tell people about that evil and how to get away from it and not be in it. But here we have an overlay of the end time in David's life. And he said, lest my enemies say, I have prevailed against him, and those who trouble me rejoice when I am moved. This is a false apostle thing that away comes from rejoicing over an apostle that suffers. The devil rejoices when an apostle suffers, and David was an apostle of God. He was writing the epistle of God. As we read David's life, we're reading the living epistle of God. David was an epistle of God. But when he fell out, when he sinned, he got on the sideline. His sideline writings were tough, and his life was tough, and he was forlorn, and he was miserable inside. But he always had that spot in his life where God was. The light of God was on David, no matter, even through his troubles. He said, lest my enemies say I have prevailed against him. Wow. In verse 4. See, the enemy of Jesus Christ said that he prevailed against him, but he didn't. That what the enemy did for Christ when he put him on the cross was allowed him to go through the victory that he was supposed to have. He had victory over sin on the cross. The last 3 hours of his life, as he hung there on the cross, and he took the sin of the world upon him for 3 hours of darkness, as God poured that sin through the blood of Christ, strained it through that blood, and took that ball of sin that was left in that cloth that God strained the sin through the blood of Christ, and he took that big ball and he cast it over into hell, into the place of total darkness, and he gave it back to where it came from. And he gave the devil back from day one. The first sin with Adam and Eve was strained through the blood of Christ. All of it was strained through. And the black salt, or whatever it was that was left, God took it and he cast it over there back into hell. And when Jesus hung on the cross, he had a great tribulation and a great thing. David is somewhat going through a turmoil as God's servant over here. And it's kind of a forerunner or a likeness of Christ on the cross, what David was going through here. Except Christ never sinned, but he had to take that sin. He took the sin that David had committed and cast it into the sea of forgetfulness over there, because David had asked for God to prevail, to come and so that his enemy wouldn't come against him and trouble him. Here in verse 4, look at verse 5. But I have trusted in your mercy. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. Jesus, as he hung on the cross and that sin came on him for that last 3 hours, the mercy of God maintained him and kept him through. His own son taking this sin on, kept him through that time when God had to turn his face on this earth. And there were 3 hours of darkness upon the face of the earth for this period of time, as the sin was sifted through the blood of Jesus Christ and all cast away into the sea of forgetfulness. The Old Testament sin that had been in the Old Testament came through. He said, let my enemies say, I have prevailed against him. That those who trouble me rejoice when I am moved. And verse 5, but I have trusted in your mercy. May my heart shall rejoice in your salvation. By the way, the heart of God was burst on the cross. In verse 6, I will sing unto the Lord, because he has dealt bountiful with me. The Son of God could say this to his Father, because God brought him through that horrendous 3 hours of darkness on the cross. I will sing unto the Lord. David was in his 3 hours of darkness here. This reaffirms so often that God appears in the Scripture, that he is the overcomer. He is the compassionate one. Both here, as he's compassionate to David and comes to David, just as he was compassionate to his son on the cross, came to him. And the final picture after the great awakening of the Spirit of God to come on this earth and walk on this earth after that, and be be able to come into men and dwell in men, and give them what God would have them say for the future state. All of the troubles and the suffering that were on the cross, we're going to see again a time of Jacob's trouble come at the end. It's going to be like that 3 hours of darkness when God comes and wipes away and does away at the Battle of Armageddon, wipes away that group of people that have come against him with Satan as their leader and the foe against God. We're going to see that happen again. Now, David's life is a picture of this world as it has stood from ever since, from David to today. God is still on the throne. He was on the throne with David. He brought David through those troubles, and his final end was as Jesus was, victory. Victory over the devil and over his works. Well, we'll see you next time, Brother Peter, with tidbits from the Word. This has been Psalm 13, a small psalm with great depth. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Why hasn't this fallen in?